YouTube, follow us, please follow us at Q95 FM Radio. The on your phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews only on the big station. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. I'm joined tonight by very distinguished guests. Someone you haven't heard for a while, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, social scientist Simeon Joseph, and another gentleman that you may not have heard on the Global View for a while as well, UWP leader and financial economist, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. I want to make an excuse for Attorney Gabriel Christian. He was going to join us tonight, but he's been caught up in some things. He just sent me a note saying he may not be able to join us tonight. Uh, we regret that. And all the best to you, brother Gabriel. As we know, gentlemen, Dominica is pregnant with issues, but there is little or no delivery of meaningful, sustainable results. We will touch on a few of the current burning issues in Dominica, like electoral reform, this vexing issue of the situation in Domlec and electricity, what we're doing all over the country. People are hurting. We'll talk about the geothermal energy project a little bit because there are problems there. We're not being told about it. But what we're being told is that it could come on stream in the last quarter of 2024-25. I don't think anything close is going to come there. And because Domlec was sort of relying on that, it seems to me that our problems may be a lot greater than we think they are as far as electricity is concerned, and certainly as far as renewable energy is concerned. We still have the issues of the passport sales and the visa restriction issues. So we know that the passport sales will begin declining if they have not started declining already. Whatever is sold is sold. The revenue is there somewhere. They have not seen it. It's somewhere. I'm not sure that we're going to continue to have the level of sales that has been happening in the past due to a lot of things. We'll go over some of those things as we go along tonight. I'm sure we're all aware that the crime situation, the safety situation, the national security situation, there are many issues there. We see too many murders happening on a regular basis now. Dr. Francis Severy had warned us many years ago if we refuse to pay heed to his warning. But we still also have our healthcare issues. Gone are the days when we go to kingpins in primary healthcare. This is not so anymore. We're hearing about major issues in our healthcare system. We need to talk about that. And I'm pretty sure our callers will join us and express their own thoughts on some of those issues. There is the international airport issue as well. We know that some efforts are being made there. We know too, it seems as if some other efforts are being made to expand the Melvin Hall Airport. But it seems to me we spent already maybe 200 million on the Melvin Hall Airport and the toilets are still not working. I wonder why. So this airport, I hope something will happen there to get somewhere. But if the revenue from the passport sales are declining, who knows whether that airport will ever get completed? And some of the other hotels that are on stream, who knows whether they too will get completed? So there are problems involved here. We know the cost of living is continuing to rise. We know that the public sector workers' salary increases are still minimal. We'll see what happens because we heard a promise from the Prime Minister that there will be some increases. We'll wait and see. So we do know that the economy is stagnant and hopefully not collapsing yet, but certainly is very stagnant. So we will examine the situation of Dominica's efforts, excuse me, to establish new electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations. The process and the tone of the consultations had recently, in that regard, offer suggestions that we can improve the process going forward to eliminate partisan political campaigns style divisiveness, to ensure that every qualified citizen or resident can freely and fairly exercise their right to vote in their country's elections on a level playing field with the ultimate goal of preserving our democracy. The current parliament, we have to remind ourselves, is a place where any new electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations must be tabled by the executive branch of government for debate and for passage, must be signed into law by the president of Dominica. But we have to also remind ourselves that we are in the middle of an undertaking to appoint a new president, be our country's new head of state. I believe, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe from the 1st of October. But who knows what is happening in that process? I still have not heard the leader of the opposition's nominee yet, and I'm not sure that, well, we'll see what happens when the House resumes again to discuss that issue. So the electoral reform process is now at a critical juncture, and I'm stressing on that because it's so important going forward. A lot of it's going to depend on that and must be handled in a transparent manner to avoid any risk of the process further deteriorating into chaos and real issues of substance remaining disastrously unresolved, especially if some politically expedient version of the legislation and regulations are enacted in Parliament with the DLP regime in office having their 19-2 parliamentary majority. So we will see the fruits. Well, the question is, will we see the fruits of the poison tree or in live and living color, or will we continue to see the lack of electoral reform, rising prices, electricity shortages, growing unemployment, all stemming from Dominica's fundamental problem, a government for a select few, by select few, and controlled by just two people? What will be the responses to this problem? Will Dominicans unite to demand change? Will we see masses of people gathering in very large numbers and saying, listen, enough is enough, it's time to put an end to this. We want the desired change. Our democracy must grow and continue to grow. And will we see that kind of mass movement taking place? This is probably what is required at this time. So will Dominicans unite and demand that change? I believe it is time for a new government to bring good governance and new ideas for the relief and the growth and the wealth generation and for development of the masses of the suffering people in Dominica. But it will be difficult to change any government now without appropriate electoral reforms. So the people must make the people's power felt to get the electoral reforms. I continue to hold the view that electoral reform legislation should be crafted, debated, and passed into law for the benefit of the nation as a whole and not be tilted or tainted to the advantage of any political party, but to promote genuine democracy in Dominica. Electoral reform finalization process must be removed from the control of the political directorate and must be moderated more neutrally and more transparently. I have a few questions and some talking points, and bear with me a moment. Things keep coming up one after another every day, and as we say, Dominica is indeed pregnant with issues with no delivery on most of them. So it is widely known and accepted that the main reason that we in Dominica are lagging so far behind our sister Caribbean states and are still at this regressive stage of fixing our tainted electoral system and processes, which was started by the Electoral Commission way back in the first quarter of 2008. It's almost entirely due to the fixation of the DLP leader Roosevelt Skerrit and his handlers to ensure the so-called re-election legacy of Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit and his handpicked candidates. We are all aware by now of that infamous email penned allegedly by Attorney Anthony Astaphan, and sent on Thursday, March 27, 2008 at 10:27 a.m. addressed to Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit, marked urgent, copy to Mr. Alec Lawrence, Mr. Hartley Henry, which stated as follows: brother, please do not drift too far. Tried calling you again today and just cannot get through. I spoke to Kondwani this morning. There is madness going on at the commission. You need to call in Richards and Kondwani. I live today. These guys are talking about reforms to include ID cards, complete re-registration. Such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us. Reform was required because of widespread fraud, signed by Anthony W. Astaphan SC. So you can understand why it's going to be difficult to get real reforms, because obviously that is the premise on which all of this consultation, of discussion is taking place. Nobody wants to do anything to affect the re-election legacy of Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit and his crew. And here is a response just to remind us, and that I'm telling you all this and reminding you again that why it's going to be difficult to get this electoral reform unless the people stand firm and demand it. The response allegedly from Mr. Alex Lawrence addressed to Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit on 20th April 2008 read as follows. Hi, comrades. I am due to attend my first commission meeting on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Although due to a mediation at 10 a.m., I'm only able to spend 1 hour there. I see from the documents sent to me that the commission has taken a decision to introduce a new voter registration system before the next election. I have serious reservations about this and would like to have a chat with you both about it. I would prefer not to do so via email. Tony, I understand that such a new system was introduced in St. Kitts, St. Lucia, and possibly in St. Vincent. Can you get me for tomorrow info on how long the implementation process took in those islands? Regards, Alec. Incidentally, the minutes of the last minute show that no government representative was present. So this, as you can see, gentlemen, is primarily the reason why Dominica is still where it is now, struggling with electoral reform and its tainted electoral system and processes. And that is precisely the reason why the DLP regime cannot be trusted to single-handedly continue to hijack the electoral reform process and determine the outcomes it desires, which is to secure the so-called re-election legacy of Mr. Skerrit and his personally handpicked candidates, in order to serve his purposes and to do his bidding without any questions by legalizing bribery and treating of select Dominicans who are resident overseas to conditionally vote in predetermined numbers, in specific predetermined constituencies, where a certain number of votes are required to obtain those seats in order to form a government. That certainly does not create a level playing field that can produce free and fair elections in any modern democracy. So in order to save Dominica from this catastrophe, I strongly recommend that the organizations that participated in the consultations conducted under the umbrella of the Dominica Business Forum adopt and implement their recommendations for the way forward to finalize the recommended proposals for the amendment of various applicable sections of Sir Dennis Byron's draft laws and regulations by going ahead and implementing their own recommendations to establish forthwith a national broad-based committee made up of representatives of one, established political parties, including the Dominica Labour Party, the Dominica Freedom Party, the United Workers Party, Team Dominica, Team Unity Dominica. Church organizations, including the Dominica Christian Council, the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches, the Dominica Bar Association, others, trade unions, including the Dominica Public Service Union, the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union, the Dominica Association of Teachers, the Nurses Association, the Police Welfare Association, and others. Business organizations, including the DIC, Dominica Employees Federation, and others. Civic organizations, including Concerned Citizens Movement, youth organizations like the NYCD, women's organizations, and others. This committee should be assisted by a legal draft person. This broad-based national committee should conduct the final review of Sir Dennis Byron's submitted draft bills and regulations and incorporate the recommendations made at the various consultations, where applicable, into the appropriate sections of the draft laws and regulations with the help of legal draft person engaged by this broad-based committee. The committee should seek financial assistance from Dominican firms and individuals at home and abroad, local, regional, and international firms and agencies, including the agencies that observed electoral reform consultations, as well as agencies such as the US and CDB and World Bank and others, to compensate the legal draftsperson for their drafting services in these regards. So really and truly, elections have consequences, and tainted elections, as referenced by the CCJ, have resulted in bad practices, policies which have brought Dominica's economy, culture, society, safety and national security to the brink of destruction, disaster, and nearing collapse. So let's talk about what can be done to save Dominica from the collapse that we are already witnessing. It's been manifested in agriculture, in manufacturing, in processing, in tourism, in energy or electricity, whichever way you want to see it, safety and national security, rising crimes and murders, disastrous foreign policies, and the appointment of unsavory characters as ambassadors, poor environment, architecture, and cultural practices. And the list goes on and on and on. I'm going to stop here with my talking points, and I will come back with some more talking points a little bit later, because there are a considerable number of things that we need to thrash out. And it's probably going to take more than one show for us to thrash out all of them. But certainly we need to hear some of those things, right? We know, for example, that as we focus on the important issues of residency and who should have the right to select a parliamentary representative, we need to remember that a parliament is selected specifically for a period of 5 years to speak on behalf of the people living in one specific constituency. Nobody is disenfranchised by any parliament if they do not reside in that specific constituency. So now the strength of a government depends on the independence of parliamentarians who work directly for the improvement of the lives of their constituents in their constituencies. And of course, we hear all this talk about disenfranchisement, but I hope that one of my guests will speak about a little brief note we saw from the Virgin Islands, for example, where it's saying that you cannot, if you're in St. Thomas, you cannot go and vote in any other part of the states. And if you're registered in any other country or any place in the world, you cannot vote in St. Thomas. You have to be registered there and there alone. So we'll get to some of those things here. But my distinguished guests, Dr. Irving Andre and social scientist Simeon Joseph and UWP leader, financial economist Dr. Thompson Fontaine, will give us a little bit more guidance on this. So we all look forward to securing good governance that will stop the hemorrhaging in our economy, take it from crisis to recovery, lift the people out of poverty and mendicancy, and improve their daily lives and livelihoods. All right, so we all look forward to all of those things. And so what I want to say now is that we want to welcome every single Dominican and friend of Dominica. Wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, globally, please tune in, call in, join the conversation, get the answers to your questions. Please be part of the solution on the big station. And we want to say, as usual, a huge shout out, hugs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, all of the public and private sector patriots. We welcome you, every Dominican, every friend of Dominica, to the global view of Q. We embrace you wherever you are, every nook and cranny, every community, every village in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console tonight, again, directing the traffic. We will take your calls a little later, because the people's voice is always a priority for us. So let's get started right now. Let me go immediately to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to examine the state of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance reform and regulations efforts, the 6 or 7 critical electoral reform issues concerned, the state of the preparedness of Dominica's parliamentarians, and the state of preparedness of the Speaker of the House to engage in free and fair, equitable, substantive debate, and especially with respect to the anticipated debates of the bills with respect to the electoral and campaign finance reform laws and regulations that must be tabled in the Parliament for passage into law. We will delve into all of those issues as we go along. So, Dr. Andre, in no further ado, let me yield to you. You get the first word.
Thank you, Mr. G, and I commend you for your very illuminating introduction. Let me say good evening to the esteemed panelists, Mr. Simeon Joseph, social scientist, and obviously Dr. Thompson Fontaine, who needs no introduction, neither does Lambi. And let me again say good evening to your wonderful listeners. These are difficult times. These are difficult times not only in Dominica but elsewhere, but they are more difficult in Dominica because, quite frankly, the difficulties that many Dominicans face are man-made. man-made in the sense that they are the fruit of the poison tree. And the question is, where do we go from here? But before delving into the intricacies of the crisis, the energy crisis, let me just make a few comments with respect to electoral reform. We have emerged from the consultations, I use the term rather loosely, regarding electoral reform. Now, many of us were quite shocked at the manner in which these consultations were held. Many of us were quite shocked at the blatantly partisan nature of these consultations. But with every dark cloud, there's a silver lining. Because in the manner in which those who were appointed or anointed or chosen to make presentations during these consultations by the electoral by the directorate, we saw a pattern emerging. And one thing that the consultations did, an unexpected result, was to betray just how dire is the need for true electoral reform. Because what we were confronted with, what we were presented with, was the presentations, or were the presentations of persons who were quite clearly and obviously cherry-picked to sing the same song. And that song, quite frankly, is a nightmare to Dominicans who dream of free and fair elections. Many of us who listen to them, listen to the presentations, they came to the realization that what they were confronted with were not the innocent views of persons concerned about Dominica's future and the integrity of Dominican voting process, but they were confronted with a regurgitation. After many of the, or if not all, the presenters were coached to say the same thing. It could not be coincidence that virtually all these presenters, all those who were supporting the government side, said essentially the same thing. And let me summarize what they said, because what they said was so drastic that they even, in many respects, repudiated what Sir Byron himself is proposing. For example, they all parroted the following: we don't want voter ID cards. Well, why would you not want voter card ID cards if you are interested in preserving the integrity of your elections? All countries, Antigua, in other St. Kitts, other countries in the Eastern Caribbean, recognize the significance of having voter ID cards to preserve the integrity of their elections. You can talk about national ID cards, but the simple fact of the matter is, whereas the possession of a voter ID card is proof that you are eligible to vote, the possession of a national ID card does not constitute proof that you are eligible to vote. It's a very simple thing. Another thing you heard is only the dead should be removed from the voters list. Not even Sir Byron is proposing this recipe, which is basically a key to electoral fraud. Sir Byron's proposal, which certainly I reject, is that someone who may be abroad or living abroad for more than 5 years can nevertheless meet the residential criterion for voting if he or she comes to Dominica somewhere between 50 and 90 days in a 5-year cycle. My position is simple. That is a recipe for voter fraud and electoral rigging. Why do I say so? Well, the evidence is clear based on the last 3 election cycles. During the last 3 section cycles, voters have been given tickets to come to Dominica to vote. Not only have they been given tickets to come to Dominica to vote, but they have been directed where they should vote. And let me ask you, simply from a commonsensical perspective, How can you expect to have free and fair elections where hundreds of voters living abroad, some 10, 15, 20, 25 years, enticed by the offer of a free ticket and directed to vote in a particular constituency? How can you have free and fair elections under those circumstances? The consultations have been very instructive because they exposed the real thinking of the electorate. You have a minister of government who says giving a friend a right to come to Dominica to vote is not bribery. Others have said, well, if you pay the passage of someone who intended to vote for the political directorate, that is not bribery. Now, obviously, these pronouncements are empty if you consider the law of bribery. In fact, even so, Byron, and I'll come to that a little later, referred to the Hillsbury Laws of England. And somebody said in one of these presentations that Andre wants to stick us with the Hillsbury Laws of England. Well, my middle name is not Sir Dennis, and my last name is not Byron. Sir Byron himself, in phase 2 of his report, indicated that given that the Hillsbury Laws of England define the giving of an airfare or seafare to a person with the intention to have that person come to vote or refrain from voting constitutes bribery. Indeed, that is his justification for not specifically introducing that definition of bribery into his proposed legislation. And yet some of these folk said with no shame that it is not bribery. So you understand basically the thinking. What they want is to be able to do what they want in terms of having people to come to Dominica to vote, irrespective of whether it constitutes an offense. I can tell you one observer or one person from the Bahamas told the Dominican fellow that they cannot understand what is happening in Dominica. If a quarter of what is happening in Dominica by way of the voting process happened in Bahamas, these persons would be dragged before the criminal courts. And that is the sad reality that we face. So we are saying that we should enforce the laws with respect to the residency requirements as they exist today. We don't want any type of fanciful change which would give us the ability to boast that we are setting the trend in the West Indies. Who is going to follow that trend? None of the other islands have followed that type of trend. And it's not because we are smarter than them. It's because they understand that preserving the integrity of the voting process is of paramount importance, and that no one party should have the unlimited ability to manipulate the process to their own good. And you know, Mr. G, you made reference to the fact that in certain jurisdictions, these residency requirements remain on the books. I have made reference in other presentations to legislation, whether in Jamaica, whether in Barbados, whether in St. Vincent, whether in Trinidad, that have similar provisions in the electoral laws. And that is one justification, in my view, why we should adhere to what presently exists. We also heard during the consultations, many Dominicans resided in the USVIs, beating their chests like Tarzan or Jane or whoever, saying how they are being disenfranchised. They want to be enfranchised, and they want that free ticket, and they want the free spending money, because this is what this is all about. Well, here's what obtains in the USVI. A little blurb which was sent to me. There was a campaign, a registration day drive in the USVI. And you know what the requirements of their voting are, Mr. G, in the Virgin Islands? Citizen of the United States, must be 18 years of age or turn 18 before the next election, must meet the residency requirement. Those same jokers who are crying or with false tears, obviously, crocodile tears, that Dominicans are trying to disenfranchise them, they have to meet the residency requirement in the U.S. Virgin Islands to vote. But not only that, if that voter or prospective voter is registered elsewhere in any other state or in any other country or territory of the United States or any other election district, that person cannot vote. That's what their rules and regulations say. So while they adhere to these types of registrations in the adopted country, they believe that they should have the unchecked of discretion to jump on a plane or a boat or a parrot to come to vote in Dominica's elections on the basis that this is their right to do so. They have no right. They don't reside in Dominica. They don't, as I said, pay taxes. And some of them say, well, taxes that is nonsense. Oh, is it? Well, why don't you refuse to pay tax in the United States and tell the US government, oh, that is nonsense. That is not for me. But they are quiet as mice when it comes to adhering to the rules and regulations of their adopted country. Here's another thing which the folks were saying. We don't want campaign finance reform. Of course you don't. You don't, because you want things to remain as they are. You want one party with unlimited funds buried in mysterious accounts, according to someone called Zampoli, a current Dominican diplomat, where the proceeds or much of the proceeds of the sale of Dominican passports have been secreted and controlled by two men. You want that party, the incumbent, to have unlimited access to that funding, to fund elections, with no checks, no balances whatsoever. And we say that is fundamentally wrong. And we disagree fundamentally with what Sir Byron is saying. And we reject any suggestion that his recommendation reflects a so-called gold standard. It does not. Because he defines the reporting period as the period from the date the election is announced to on or about 6 months after the elections. And he proposed a limit of $5 million, but which could be increased. Theoretically, it could also be decreased, but in reality, it could only be increased by the Commission and by Parliament. And the question is, who dominates the Commission? Who dominates Parliament? So this limit that Sir Byron is proposing, in my respectful view, is meaningless because it can be proposed, it can be changed. But not only that, Sir Byron's proposal does not relate to spending before the reporting period. And we saw what happened in the last, iteration of an election in December of 2022. A day or two after the declaration of the election, all the election paraphernalia of the incumbent government appeared as if from nowhere, appeared as if miraculously, thereby indicating that all that expenditure had been made before that reporting period proposed by Sir Byron. In other words, Sir Byron's proposal with respect to campaign finance reform would have done precious little to prevent that type of profligate spending. It would have made his proposal meaningless, and it would not have been efficacious to create a level playing field in terms of electoral spending. And that is why we reject it totally, unequivocally, irrespective of what the other side is saying. And let me say this. Let me say this, because we have to confront this. Part of the arsenal deployed by the other sides is intimidation, victimization, persecution. Because somebody brought to my attention not too long ago that they were advocating for additional persons, including myself, to be charged with inciting. Well, go ahead. I know a couple of things about the law, to be quite frank with you. But that is what they depend on. And that is the ugly reality that is being exposed. The brutality of the regime. That is why people like Dr. Thompson Fontaine, Lennox, Mr. James, Danny are before the courts on charges. And I have had occasion to see the basis of the evidentiary record with respect to these folks and the charges. I say unequivocally, they have no merit in law whatsoever. It's just the latest episode of political victimization. If they're looking for evidence of charging, why don't they look at statements in public meetings, inciting people to throw hot water on those who support the opposition? Why don't they look for that type of evidence? But we will not sink to that depth of depravity. We will not advise or incite anyone to throw hot water or cold water, or to call people traitor and confront them in the streets. We will not sink to that level and that blatant, or those blatant acts of inciting. Rather, Mr. GNA, you're supposed to be the nation station, but it's unfortunate you don't have all the songs that you should have in your repertoire. But if you had that song of the Mighty Spider, in which he talked about when you meet them on the streets, you greet them and you just smile and you say you're a hypocrite. That's exactly the response that should be made. Another thing with respect to those who made presentations, many of them said, I am opposed of any party using government money. Are you opposed? But that's exactly what happened in 2019. That's exactly what happened in 2019, when an overdraft on a local bank was transformed magically into a loan of over $120 million to be paid by Dominican taxpayers. What did you say about that? Those who beat their chest and saying how they are opposed to taxpayers' funding, although that was never on the table, they said nothing. But that is further evidence, but that these folks are not really interested in anything except to walk on the plane, smile, because they didn't have to pay for the ticket, salivate over the prospect of using the spending money, and go back to the US Virgin Islands, where they are governed by laws which say that they have to meet the residency requirement to vote. It's duplicity, it's double standard, it's hypocrisy. You take your pick, Mr. G. And they also said, we don't want to expand the Electoral Commission. Of course you don't. This is something Sir Byron proposed, but they opposed to it. What they want is for things to remain just as they are. And we can understand why. Look at the members of the Electoral Commission. Ask yourself who has the controlling voice, the controlling say. So how do you expect, you who dream of free and fair elections of Dominica, you who dream of the maintenance of law and order in Dominica, what do you expect from these folk who tell you with no shame, we don't want any change to the Electoral Commission? Of course, we know you don't, because you want the gravy train to continue. And I have commented with respect to what they said already about paying supporters to travel to Dominica, to have them vote. They proclaim, oh, that's not an offense. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, if you take it to its logical conclusion, then you can pay whoever you want to come to vote. And we know what's happening, because there's evidence on YouTube, Mr. G, where you have a well-known recruiter in the United States, Miami, instructing this prospective voter that you can, if you know any other names, you can tell me, but if you have the slightest doubt about that person voting for the Labour Party, don't give me that name. So we know what's happening. There are persons who've given statements that not only were they offered a ticket to vote, but they were told in what constituency to vote. We understand what's happening. This is highway robbery. This is the rigging of an election. And this is as despicable as it comes. And these consultations is not just a test of Dominica's democracy, but it has also put the observers on trial themselves. Because what we heard being proposed by these acolytes represent collectively a repudiation of things which some of these self-same observer institutions or organizations have proposed, starting with the Organization of American States. They recommended voter ID cards. They recommended cleansing the voters list of anyone who's been abroad for 5 years because that's the gold standard. And I have addressed the whole question of the Canadian case. I don't know if I need to address it any further. I've shown how little it has or it represents or it applies with respect to the Dominican situation. It's like comparing Moroccans and Manicus, quite frankly. They have absolutely nothing in common, but they seize on the smallest piece of straw to justify what they're doing. And let me just ask that question, au passant. Isn't the Attorney General supposed to be the people's lawyer? Huh? Am I missing something here? But no. Does he stop in the US VI on his constant trips to Dubai? What is he going there for? Do they have garage sales in Dubai, Mr. G? That explains the frequent trips to Dubai? No, we understand exactly what's going on. We understand it deeply. And that is why we must be concerned about the future of Dominica. So the whole question of fighting for electoral reform is not some exercise by some persons who have nothing else to do, who have a regular paycheck and who have no financial woes. We have to deal with it because it goes to the very core of the well-being of every Dominican in Dominica, not those abroad. No, they're enjoying the fruits of their labor. They're enjoying the benefits of a proper functioning democracy. They're enjoying unemployment insurance. They're enjoying health care that works for them. They're enjoying all those benefits, but they're saddling you or they're crucifying you on the ground with a pittance. No living wage, $700 a month wage if you work with the NEP. Rampant unemployment, youth inertia and rising youth crime, business people who've been in business for donkey years struggling to survive, while they watch foreign businesses being given all kinds of benefits. $9.1 million taxes, waived, garçon. You know, that's what they have to contend with. And that is why it's so important to deal with those issues, including voter electoral reform. They also have to contend with rising prices. And I know gas prices are low, Mr. G. I understand this thing. What about the electricity? I'm not an expert. But as the Spider said in that song, I can't remember the name, it's not a matter of politics, Mr. G. It's a matter of economics. The government purchased Domlec, didn't it, in 2022, whenever it was, for $13.5 million, according to a report which a friend sent to me. From 2009 to 2020, I believe, it paid out, Domlec did, over $24 million in dividends. But let me just break down this whole Domlec scenario, because I heard that, the problem is that we don't have enough generating capacity, and so that's the problem. It's not us. That's just a problem. But hold on, Mr. G. I mean, I know you buy your new vehicles, and I understand it. I wish, give me another 25 years, I'll be like you. You buy a vehicle, you buy a second-hand vehicle. What do you look for? You look, first of all, you look around the body to see any rust. Then you look at the engine. Now, you may not know anything about the engine. You may end up putting the oil in the windshield wipers drum or whatever it is. I understand that. But you look at the engine, or you ask somebody, you look for how much mileage it has, the wear and tear of the engine, how old it is. You ask yourself, how much life does it have left? And then you make a determination as to whether or not you should buy it, and if so, how much. And this is the analogous situation to the purchase of Domlek by the government. When you buy an asset such as this, you buy it to provide relief to your people, to bring down the rates of electricity, because you have businesses struggling, you have people, retirees struggling, you have pensioners struggling. You do so to be able to provide relief to your folks, especially with so many hundreds of $millions hidden in mysterious accounts. So all this talk about, well, you know, I mean, we don't have the capacity, you know. You mean you didn't realize that when you purchased that asset? Isn't that a matter of common sense? These old generators that you have, how much life that they have in them, how much electricity is being used, and what is the capacity? You mean these questions were not addressed by these top-rate, these technocrats? No. And now everyone is saying, well, you know, it's not our fault. It's just that the lack of capacity. No. It's the lack of competence. It's the lack of concern. It's the lack of the care for those who have to suffer as a result of frequent shutdowns of electricity. That is the point. It's a matter of governance, decision-making, being responsible. We should not be in this place. Would you purchase a sinking barge where you have to use Scotch tape to get the engine to perform? You wouldn't do so, because you would have done your due diligence and decided whether we should saddle Dominica with those difficulties. Appliances blowing up, frozen foods going to waste, people forced to maintain their silence because they're afraid of perpetual victimization. That is the ugly reality we face. And the genesis of all this is the nature of governance. We can talk about going to see the IRC or whatever it is, and we can say, well, Domlek asked IRC or whatever it is, and IRC refused because they saw geothermal on the horizon. But look at how ridiculous that is. How long have they been digging up wherever in, you know, up in the valley? How much money have they spent? My understanding, it's over $100 million. You haven't seen not even any electricity being generated. I heard there was a bullseye convention in the valley, and they were offered geothermal energy, and they said, no, we will generate our own energy, our own lights. That's how bad it's been. And yet, if the reports are true, the IRC refused the request of Domlek to purchase generators because of geothermal energy on the horizon. And we know from past experience or lack of progress that that is an uncertainty. Even if you're an ardent supporter of the government, we know there's no evidence that it will be on or we will derive energy from that source. So based on these things, in my view, we are at a stage as a society where we must contemplate a new way forward. We have no choice. We have no choice. Unless you want to be stuck with perpetual unemployment, unless you want to be stuck with perpetual rise in prices, unless you want to be stuck with very little happening in the agricultural sector, unless you want to be stuck with perpetual victimization. You have no choice. No choice but to look forward, not to dream forward, because dreaming about it, in a sense, puts it beyond the realm of reality. But what we envision is achievable because we know of the sources, the untold sources of money that have been siphoned from the consolidated fund. In fact, those mysterious funds never made their way into the consolidated fund. And we just have to look around Roseau to see what's happening. Not just Roseau, Dominica. Hotels springing up forth, despite the fact that the vacancy rate is well over 70%. Mansions and houses being purchased by mysterious individuals. Persons seeking to purchase homes with cash only. Nobody wants a check, but we have to pay cash. We wonder why. So there is an unlimited source of funds which could solve many of the problems that we face. And let me, without taking too much more of your time, just make a couple of recommendations. Just as someone who understands what's happening, I'm not an economist, so Thompson can take me to task as much as he wants. But in terms of Dominica, where we should be and where we should be heading towards. Proposal number 1, to end the siphoning of the state coffers, we must join hats and hands to elect and to select a new administration to govern the affairs of Dominicans. Priority number 1. 2, to do so, we must unite all forces, whether political forces, community organizations, religious leaders, business leaders, youth leaders, to save Dominica. That is imperative. 3, we must mobilize Dominicans at home by going to their neighborhoods, finding out the problems they face daily and making them realize that the power that they collectively have must be brought to bear on their own well-being. We must have them participate in their own redemption. 4, we must reach out to the vast majority of us overseas Dominicans who refuse to sell out their compatriots in Dominica or condemn them to a life of hardship for a free ticket and a few dollars more. We must set up a program of incentives to encourage overseas Dominicans to renovate or build homes or establish businesses in their country of origin. We must create the enabling environment to encourage them to do so. 5, we must establish a program of empowerment and development by giving people hope that they are not simply replacing the devil they know with the devil they don't know. The program must include a number of things, including A, tax-free grants of a minimum of $25,000 from the CBI program to every household which income is below a fixed limit. B, certificates of title for those in housing built with money that should have gone into the consolidated fund. C, a heritage fund of at least $50 million or more to assist farmers to develop their crops and to provide markets for their crops. D, a relentless drive to boost production of citrus and vegetables, among others, and to boost agro-industry in Dominica. E, subsidies on building materials to those who meet certain preconditions. F, subsidies on gas and electricity to those who meet certain financial thresholds. G, the systematic dismantling of the infrastructure of political favoritism, nepotism, and corruption. 8, the leveling of the economic playing field for Dominican businesses to ensure that concessions given to foreign-owned businesses are also given to them. Okay. Ensuring that businesses pay their rightful share of taxes as all other businesses do. A program of offering programs to Dominican youth to enable them to acquire skills and to enable them to study abroad without being indebted to the institutions where they study. J, putting an end to political victimization in Dominica. L, I believe, a program of gender empowerment to fully benefit, to ensure that all citizens, irrespective of their gender, fully benefit from all of Dominica's resources. 6, cleansing the law enforcement forces to end the political victimization of persons who are denied or who are deemed not to support the government. 7, ensuring that employment and promotion in the public service are based on merit rather than on sexual exploitation or a political affiliation. 8, ensuring that all Dominican workers receive a living wage. In other words, a wage that can enable them to pay their essential debts, such as the rent, the mortgage, children, take care of their children, their school, and providing food for their families. 9, a program of empowering our architects and engineers and environmentalists to pool their resources to rescue our historical buildings, protected lands, and our environment. 10, a massive effort to rebuild, renovate, and resuscitate our healthcare system, not just by providing it with the medical or infrastructural resources it needs, but by repatriating our doctors who've been mercilessly banned from offering their expertise at our hospitals. 11, giving pensioners and retirees, many of whom worked tirelessly for Dominica for decades, a monthly pension that not only reflects their service to Dominica, but enable them to live with dignity without having to beg to provide for themselves and their family. And lastly, the funding and promotion of Dominica's indigenous culture by helping to establish a local music industry, an audio library facility for the presentation of Dominican music, and also the repatriation of the World Creole Festival to ensure that at least one of these festivals, only Dominican musicians are featured. We should have the confidence to do so, rather than try to validate ourselves by paying astronomical sums to musicians who all too often don't even appear at these festivals. Dominica deserves better. And so, Mr. G, we are at this juncture where we have to confront what it is that we wish to set out for the future. We know the problems we face. We know the difficulties that we have to contend with daily. We know the intransigence with respect to meaningful change. We understand that there lies within the breasts of every Dominican an inner strength that is waiting to be tapped, that is waiting to be resuscitated. A little king and a little queen which is waiting, or who is waiting to be crowned like a champion. And it is our mission to bring out that champion to rescue Dominica. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for that, Dr. Andre. We hadn't heard from you for a little while. We know you've been engaged otherwise in some very important works, but certainly, I mean, we appreciate the introductory remarks you've given us here tonight. In actual fact, you've already created the segue to Dr. Thompson Fontaine, because I mean, these are some of the things I was hoping that Dr. Thompson Fontaine would speak to us about, because as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we can see that our economy is on the brink of collapse. All of the things that you mentioned, whether it's to do with our agriculture or tourism or agribusiness or manufacturing or processing, you can see nothing is working. But yet, the very young people and a lot of the young women are very enterprising, and they're making great efforts, and they're starting some new businesses which are based on adding value to local raw materials. All they need is support, as Dr. Andre said, to create those avenues for them to raise the finances, get the expertise, so that they can build their products, meet international standards, and facilitate them so that they can access the foreign markets to earn, to get foreign earnings and generate wealth, create jobs, right? So, Dr. Thompson Fonty, let me just go over to you now, so that I know that you're in. I know that it's running a bit late for you where you are, but I wanted, as you start, to just tell us what in fact is happening. Dr. Andre mentioned it. You have been persecuted for 5 years or thereabouts. You were not even on the ground at the time that thing, whatever was happening, is clearly happening. From what Dr. Andre is saying, and from what I have understood, there is no evidence that can be brought to court to support the charges that have been levied against you and the opposition members. And I'm just wondering, why is it that there is no move to have this thing dismissed for want of prosecution? So maybe you can give us a little update of what is happening to you and your other colleagues in the courts these days.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. G, and of course to the distinguished panel, Simeon and Dr. Andre. And Lambi, good evening to you and to our listeners in Dominica and all over the world. It is indeed an honor to be here tonight and to just, spend some time discussing and sharing with the Dominican public. A few years ago, and I'm going to come to your question in just a little bit, but a few years ago, I was in the country of Niger. Niger is a West African country that has been in the news lately. It's a country I know very well, because when I was an economist at the IMF, that was my portfolio, one of my countries, Niger. I would go there very often. And I remember one time, the receptionist at the hotel I was staying, he told me, he looked at me and he said, "La vie à la campagne est dure. Il est dure. Il est dure." I would like to say, and what he was telling me is that life in this country is hard. Life in this country is hard. And I would say, la vie à la Dominique est dure. It is hard. It is extremely hard. And my heart goes out to the Dominican public, because it looks like every single sector of the Dominican population is under pressure. Every single sector. Our students that have been embarrassed in universities in the United States because the government has refused to pay their tuition. Our farmers who have been denied markets over all of those years. Many of them have been forced to leave the country, or farmers who once used to make $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a week are now forced to work as security officers, guards, for a couple $100 a month. Down to our nurses, overworked, our doctors, overworked, without the necessary medicines to treat patients in the hospital, our health system under pressure, to our NEP workers who are working diligently and yet are not able to receive pay, down to our young people that have now resorted to killing each other. We heard the case of this young man who just walked up to a young boy in Roseau and shot him because he wanted his chain. Every single sector of the economy of the country, our elderly people under pressure, the $300 that they've been extended to by this government, they're now realizing that it can do nothing for them because the economy is in such a bad place. Inflation is taking off. We now have inflation of close to 10% a month now in Dominica, in Dominica. And so when you look at all of these difficulties that we have, tells you that things are difficult. Things are extremely bad in Dominica. And quite frankly, life in Dominica today, Mr. G, is a living hell for the people of Dominica. And as Dr. Andre rightly indicated, that all boils back to the governance of this country. All of those issues that I have outlined, all of these problems that I have talked about, the social issues we are seeing among our young people, the fact that our young people are losing hope, all of those can be pointed back to the kind of governance we have in this country. The issues that we are having now with Domlec, we're talking about high and rising prices. I saw a release from the IRC, and I think it was instructive that they were talking about negotiations to revise the rates. And that can only mean one thing. It can only mean that higher prices are coming for Domlec. The government told us in the budget of July that they were going to renegotiate the taxes around petrol. So we can expect come January or even as later this year, we can expect much higher prices for petrol. I don't have to tell you, if you go down to the Rosal Market, you will see that stuff you used to get for $5, you now have to dish out $10, $12 for it. A Kubali that once cost $5 is now worth $6. So in all of that, the government of Dominica has decided to give a wage increase to the public servants, which is good. The wage increase is good, but it is just clearly not enough. 6% is not enough. It means the average public servant is probably going to get an additional $150 a month. Now, if you've not received a wage increase over the past 20 years, 15, 20 years, it means that this $120 is already eaten up. This extra $120 you're getting is already eaten up, because there was a time it was 0.0000000. So we are in a very difficult place in Dominica, and my heart truly goes out to the Dominican public, having to try to make ends meet in those very difficult situations, having to try to earn a living with those low salaries to take care of their families. And every day it gets harder and harder. Il est dur, the life in Dominica, and we would say in Creole, la vie wed. It is difficult in Dominica. And so I just wanted to start off with expressing my heartfelt, the pain that I feel personally as a Dominican, the pain that I feel for the people that are suffering. On an almost daily basis, Mr. G, I get requests from Dominicans on almost daily basis. Can you help me with my school fees for my kid this year, this month? I just cannot make it. I need an extra money to pay a Domlec bill there. They cut my light. They cut my water. It's endless. It is constant. And with that kind of pain, with that kind of suffering that the public is going through, we see on the other side the largesse where some people are living. We see the people who are supporting this government in what they're doing because they're benefiting, they're feeding from the cow. And so they could care less about the farmers. They could care less about the overstretched nurses. They could care less about the overstretched teachers and police officers. They could care less about the farmer who is no longer able to support his family. They could care less about the young people who have lost hope, quite frankly, and who have turned on each other. They're killing each other. They're hurting each other. They're mean to each other. You have a government, you have a prime minister who continues to siphon off $64,000 from the Dominican public unashamedly, without any kind of remorse, without even feeling guilty, without even feeling ashamed, knowing that every night Dominicans are going to sleep hungry. I had this man tell me, I stopped a couple of weeks ago when I was in Dominica to talk to the fishermen there in Foncolé. And I had this man tell me, wait not for his neighbor, who has been able to give him a little thing every night, a little bread and some juice. He would have no dinner because he has no money. The pain that our people are going through, Mr. G, the pain and the suffering our people are going through in a situation where we appear to have so much. We've never had as much money belonging to Dominica as we've had under this Dominica Labour Party government. We are selling passports at $100,000 a pop, and we've sold thousands. So when you do the math, these are billions of dollars in revenues that should have been working for the people of Dominica. It is not working for the people of Dominica. Who is it working for? It's working for the Prime Minister, building his mansions like there is no tomorrow. It's working for the Prime Minister, siphoning up the 64,000. It is working for those who continue to cry the loudest about why we should not have reforms in the electoral system. I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, a very strong labor right friend of mine, just 2 days ago. And we're talking about the issue of electoral reform. He says, you know, people just making noise. You guys are just making noise about, people coming down to vote and so on. It's not that turning the elections. I say, my friend, well, if you believe that bringing voters down is not making a difference, why do you do it? Why spend millions of dollars in doing it? It seems to me the fact that you're prepared and your government to use taxpayers' money to spend millions of dollars to give a free right to Dominicans to come and vote tells me that you're getting a benefit from it. And the benefit is to continue to impose the Labour Party government on the people of Dominica. So, but these are people who are apologists for the government because they themselves are close to the government. They're benefiting from it. And in the glare, in this very bright light, it's like I have a bright light shining on me now. I can't see much around me because everywhere else is dark because the light is so bright. In the glare, in the brightness of getting something, of benefiting, everything else goes dim. They don't see the suffering. They don't see the pain. They don't even feel the pain and the suffering of the people of Dominica. La vie do. They have a bomb CO and things are cool. Things are good. So that's where we are, Mr. G. It's extremely disturbing to me as leader of the United Workers' Party, a party who was in office for 5 years in the 90s, that showed how development should be done, that showed how a government should care for the people by building schools, by opening up avenues for farmers, opening up avenues for fishermen, opening up avenues for the young people, sending our students to study medicine and law and engineering and taking care of them overseas. We saw a government, a United Workers' Party government that cared deeply about the people of Dominica. And we've moved to the extreme now. We've moved from a government that cared, that invested in, that did things for, that created opportunity, that ensured that people had money in their pockets, that ensured that farmers could be proud to go to the bank and deposit a couple thousand every month or every week. We've moved from that, caring about the people, to a government that is flippant, that is careless in its dealings with the people, that could care less about the people. And when the cry becomes too much, they turn around and they throw a few crumbs to the people of Dominica. Few crumbs in the form of $300 a month for the old people, a few crumbs in the form of an apartment whose sewage is backed up, and they withhold the title from these people because you're not supposed to own, you're not supposed as a Dominican under the Labour Party government to aspire to anything except dependence, except a complete dependence on the government. And that's where we are. We've come full circle, a completely different change in the way Dominica was. And so we're in a state of crisis. The economy is collapsed. Our people are suffering deeply. They're hurting badly. And I'm sure it's not just me. I'm sure you've heard, Mr. G. I'm sure you get the requests. I'm sure people reach out to you because people are desperate, and people that you don't even expect. People that I thought were probably getting by, they were probably modeling through. These are the people that are reaching out. And they've lost, they're not even constrained anymore. You know, things are so desperate. You know, sometimes if you want something badly, you still have a little West Payme, I think that's what we call it in Dominica. You have a little West Payme, you know, you don't want to really let people know your situation. You feel badly about it. People have gone beyond that now. They're not even at the point where they don't want people to know because it's desperation time. And all of that has been heaped on the people of Dominica by this Dominica Labour Party government and the Roosevelt-Skerrit regime. And yet this government, after all of that pain, that misery, that suffering, that heartache, I think of the students, for example, who have been issued those letters that says you're not welcome in this school anymore until your government can pay. You're not welcome. You will not get your degree. You will not get your certificate. I feel the pain for those people, what they must be going through, the mental stress on these young people. That was not the case when we were students and growing up. That was not how our government treated us. And so, you know, I mean, I can go on and on with just the litany and just the endless, but that is what is on my mind. That is what is on my heart, is the pain. And this latest thing with Domlek is just the latest. That is what happens on the failed governments. That is what happened when the government stops caring. All of a sudden, something that worked for years no longer works. You know, people's food are spoiling on the fridges. Lights are going. I saw a fridge that caught fire when it came back on with a vroom. You know, it just burnt up the person's fridge. You have those issues when you have a government that's stopped caring. You have those issues in a country where you have a government that has failed the people, that's all about itself, where corruption becomes an institution, where the theft of the state resources becomes commonplace, and where the government turns around and tell the people, go to hell, go to hell, go to hell. But before I end, Mr. G, you asked me a question at the start, and I would like to basically address, and I think it's not about me, what I'm going through, what I've had to endure, the fact that it has cost quite a pretty penny just to come to attend the cases and so on, constantly coming to court and postponement. I had 6 postponements already of the case. In the last time in court in August, just about in July, in late July, the last time I appeared in court in late July, there were 2 charges against me. One charge for obstruction, which is a misdemeanor, I'm told. In other words, it has to be heard in the lower courts. And then the other one, the more serious charge for incitement. We were going through the magistrate's court process to decide whether or not there was a case to go to the High Court. But we agreed to take a paper committal, which meant that we did not go through the process of a trial at the magistrate's court. Paper committal, it is now committed to the High Court. So I'm expecting to be indicted by the High Court and appear before the High Court on the charge of incitement. And on the lesser charge of obstruction, he said I obstructed a police officer or police officers. On that day we had the protest. On that charge, I am back in court on December the 15th before a magistrate. So that's a magistrate affair. The magistrate will decide my guilt or my innocence on December the 15th, hopefully, if there is another postponement. So I'm still within the court system. Still for something which obviously I have no idea of. I was Everybody heard me on the radio on that day. Clearly, the records are there. The government knows it. The police knows it. And yet they are persisting with this vicious persecution, not only of myself, but of the former Prime Minister, Mr. James, Honorable Lennox Linton, Spags John, Brian Linton, Sam Christian, Danny Luge, all of us, and our only crime really is that we've stood up to this government because we demand better for the people of Dominica. We want better for the people of Dominica. We are saying, Mr. Lee, that things do not have to be as they are. This country can literally be swimming in oil, even if it has no oil. It can be swimming in oil. It can be a real paradise as it was meant to be, a real Garden of Eden as it was meant to be. But we have to get rid of this governance. We have to get rid of this cancer that has grown into the hearts and that has gone into every cell, every crevice of the body, or of the body politic of this country, that has so broken us as a people. Our people are broken. The pain that our people are suffering, looking for the exits. How can I get to the US? How can I migrate out of Dominica? How can I leave this country? Papa Bon Dieu, it's not working for me. And that is where we are. And that is the conversation that we need to have now in Dominica. How do we tell this government time? It is enough. You've done enough. You've done enough damage to the people of Dominica. Give us a chance to build our country. Give us a chance to look after the interests of the people of Dominica. Give us a chance to work in the best interests of the people. Let us have a government that cares firstly about the people, that puts the people of Dominica first, that puts the interests and the well-being of the people of Dominica first. Let us have in place a government that will ensure that its hospital is well equipped with the medicines, with the doctors, with the specialists, so that when the people fall sick, they can get the treatment that they deserve, and not have a government or a prime minister that mocks the people and says, Zafezo, si mwen tobe malade, mwen Roosevelt Skerrit, mwen sa ale lot peyi, mwen ni assurance mwen ni sa wuni, mocking the people of Dominica, knowing full well that the very basic paracetamol, the very basic cast, you get a broken leg in Dominica tomorrow, God forbid, you'll be in pain for days. Not even the plastic cast they have to put on your foot in Dominica. That is where we are in 2023 in Dominica. When we had passed this in the 70s, when doctors like Dr. McIntyre, Dr. Grell, and Dr. Sorrento, and all of those stalwarts of Dominican medicine, I remember those names from in my sleep. Dr. Watty and all of these doctors and of prominence and intellectual depth and who took care of the people of Dominica, who cared about the people of Dominica, and who had the means to do so because the hospital was equipped. And now, all of those years later, we are at the point where you go to the hospital, they don't show off coming out. Dominicans are afraid, to go to this hospital. Dominicans are afraid to go to the hospital because at the back of their mind is if they go in there, they may not come back alive. What a disgrace. Where one time people were coming to Dominica for medical procedures. We've lost that. Where are we going, Mr. G? Where are we going? What are we going to do about it as Dominicans? I'm done for now.
Well, thank you so much, Thompson. And your question that you just asked is a question I was going to ask to Simeon Joseph. He's a social scientist. I'm not. Dr. Andre is an attorney. I'm not. But here's the thing, Simeon. If there is a case before the court and you have evidence to support the case and you have witnesses who are going to give evidence to support the charges that you're bringing. Why is there need to postpone that case 5 and 6 times? I can't figure that out. If you claim that you have real evidence, I mean, you should not be bringing those charges, I mean, willy-nilly, just for the sake of being frivolous. I imagine that you think you have serious charges. What is taking so long?
Just for the sake of being frivolous, I imagine that
yeah. What is taking so long to bring the evidence, bring the witnesses to prosecute the cases? Because it seems to me that 5 years, to me, this should have been null prosecuted already for want of prosecution. So, Simeon, I want to go to you now to not only talk about that, but you know, Thompson mentioned this thing, the pressure and pain that the people of Dominica are undergoing at this time. I think it's real, and you know about it. Let's talk about that and some of the solutions and all the things you want to talk about, Simeon, some of the solutions that we want to put before the people of Dominica to take themselves out of the morass that they're now in.
Okay. Good night, Mr. Gregoire.
To you, Simeon.
Good night, Dr. Fontaine. Good to see you. Good night, Dr. Andre. It's amazing that you began with asking me about solutions. Because previous to you asking me about solutions, we heard the fact that we heard words coming across like struggling and how difficult it is, as Dr. Fontaine so well articulated. The question we have to ask is, how can we come up with solutions in the midst of where we are? And I always like to punctuate my presentations with a mantra. And so the mantra I want to use tonight is a classical Latin ecclesiastical mantra. And that mantra is Quo Vadis Dominica. Quo Vadis Dominica. Where are we marching? Where are we going? And just to situate it into context, where that thing comes from, it speaks of Peter fleeing Rome in the midst of Rome burning. And while he was fleeing Rome and running away from Rome burning, he meets Christ on the way, and Christ asks Peter, Quo vadis, Peter? And Peter responded in Latin saying, I'm going to be crucified upside down. It's also significant when we think of the meaning of that word "co" in two other interpretations in terms of the meaning of the word "quo vadis." Where is Dominica going? You know, we can also attribute the word to "quo," status quo. The way things are socially, economically, politically, religiously, defining the status of things are. Ironically, further, politically, we have another way "quo" is used, and it's called quid pro quo. To give something to get something. And so within that context, I'd like us to reflect on Quo Vadis Dominica. I mean, Dr. Thompson is the economist. He has spoken on the economic situation in Dominica, and lots more can be said about the economic situation in Dominica. Because he didn't mention the number of people from Wesley and Woodford whose lands have been taken and they have not yet been paid. How are they living? How are they? I have two cousins whose lands have been taken away from them, and they are yet to receive 1 penny. Then the government goes and say people are being paid, and I just don't want to call their names tonight because I keep asking them about it. One of my cousins, her husband has died, and he has not seen the fruits of his land being taken away from him. Okay? And these are just some of the examples as you think of driving around Dominica and you're looking at the economic situation of the young people who are sitting on the sides of the streets, of the public servants who were once the middle class of the society in Dominica. In the 70s and 60s and 80s, it was the public servants, the policemen, the teachers, the nurses who held our banks afloat, who were the engine of economic activity for Dominica. Today, our public servants can hardly make ends meet. They have to be going at the different small loan lending agencies to pay their basic monthly supplies and requirements. Our policemen are struggling. Our teachers are struggling. I understood there are some teachers who can't even buy clothes and shoes to go to school. Where have we heard that happening before? Our nurses are struggling. Okay? And that is just one offshoot of, not to mention the number of young men and women in Dominica today who cannot find jobs and have to be struggling to make ends meet. Okay? And that is something very grievous, because when we're talking about a major demographic as of our young people in Dominica today who cannot find a job, who cannot find gainful employment, people would have left school at 18 years and 19, 20, 21, up to 25, 26 years cannot find a job. 8, 9, 10 years after leaving high school. No means of gainful employment. It means these people are going to their adult life without ever being
Looks like your internet, I think, may have a little issue, Simeon. We'll give you a moment for it to hopefully come back up. But so I guess Simeon is going to probably just log off and log back in again. But Dr. Andre, while we wait for Simeon, I wanted to engage you on this, because it seems to me good governance is what is lacking, I mean, where is the long-term planning? Where is the vision? Where is the mission statement? Where is the plan for the young people and the elderly? Where is the plan for the public officers? Where is the plan for the manufacturers and the young entrepreneurs and the processors and the people in the service sector? Where are the plans for those people? Where is the enabling policy environment that is going to attract foreign direct investment, local investments, that is going to engage in activities that are going to drive foreign earnings, to build the economy, to eliminate that major national debt that the country has? And that is going to prevent the government from having to depend 65% of its budget on passport money, which is disappearing in Lithuania very quickly. Dr. Andre, maybe you can help us with some of those things while we wait for Simeon to log back in.
Well, Dr. Gonzalez and Vincent is taking all the credit for not joining the passport selling bandwagon. In fact, he said in a very proud fashion that he warned his Caribbean leaders, those he counted as his friends, that this thing is not sustainable. And he's also taking credit for ensuring that he did not go down that road. And quite frankly, he's now being feted for setting this example based on morality in politics and so on. The fact of the matter is, where is the inspiration from our leadership to persons suffering? Where is the compassion? Where is the hope? Where is the evidence of caring? I feel your pain. I will move mountains to bring relief to you. I will make it easier for you to be able to buy bread. I will make it easier for those persons in their small businesses. You have bakers who are spending hours on end in front of their stone bakeries, having to deal with the heat to bake bread, to make a modest income, to support themselves and their families. Fisher folks, the same thing. Small businesses, the proliferation of people selling stuff on the sides of roads. I see Simeon is back.
Yeah. Sorry about
What
that.
hope are we giving to these folk? And I'll stop it right there.
Right.
Well,
I seem to have had a drop in internet somehow or the other. My apologies. So if I may continue, I was just talking about the fact that when we look at the current situation in Dominica, we see the economic situation in Dominica. Then we have to look at the social instability, the threat to social stability that we are experiencing in Dominica because of the fact that that we have a very frightening and insecure society where we have a very high level of crime. Look at the kind of murders and shootings that we have in Dominica. In Granby alone, just 3 or 4 murders in a space of 2 months. Young people's lives being snuffed out. Okay, a sense of violence that is creeping in, and a whole set of social instability whereby you see a new rise of a certain level of insidious gang activity, so to speak. And with that, we have to be very concerned with those 2 things: the economic undermining of the security of our people, and the social insecurity is going to lead to a threat to the cohesion of our families. The families which are supposed to be the bedrock of society. Because if, by and large, families cannot exist with economic security and social security, we know what's going to happen in the long run to families in Dominica. Okay? And then we have to think of the religious pluralism and ambiguity that is taking place. At one time, if you were a church-going person or you were a religious person, you stood on the side of truth, on the side of ethics, on the side of morality, on the side of justice. Today, you have religious people who are condoning actions from the political directorate on the undermining of the very word of God that they stand about. Thou shalt not lie, and they glorify lies. Thou shalt not steal, and they defend stealing. Thou shalt not bear false witness against Dr. Fountain, and they promote that. So we have people in the religious circles who should be steering our society away from social instability as the beacon of hope, promulgating a kind of religious plurality and ambiguity whereby people are losing faith in religious structures. People are beginning to have diminished the amount of respect that they have for our churches, our pastors, our priests, and our religious authorities. That's a frightening situation. And then we have to look above all at something which is even more frightening in Dominica. That political divide. A political divide that is undermining the economic, social, and family and every other aspect of our society. A political divide where you have a government in power that, rather than seeking to unify a people, are dividing and ruling. And nowhere was it seen more than in the last consultations on electoral reform. An effort and a process that was supposed to bring Dominicans together for their common good. And you saw the heavy manifestation of a very overarching, high-handed political influence where the government of the day, rather than trying to harness the good spirits of the people, were actually sending a deep wedge between the people to divide them further. Apart from dividing them by telling our professionals, our economists, who can contribute to the development of the country, that some of them don't belong, or learned medical practitioners, excluding them, our international educators, excluding them, our legal luminaries, excluding them, like Dr. Andre. Dr. Andre should be a leading constitutional advisor to the government, working in tandem with the Attorney General to ensure that we have legal, guidance in this country. Dr. Fountain all the time was not the leader of the opposition. He was an international economist. Even if he was an international economist, couldn't he have been called on to lead some national economic council of United Workers' People and labor rights and all the people together? We have a lot of talented Dominicans at home and abroad who have been denied an opportunity to have a stake in the developmental process of their country. Where in every institution, in the police force, in the nursing service, in the teaching service, people have been pitted against each other. We have a police force that is totally wedged down the middle. and growing suspicion within the ranks of the police force, in the fire service, in the teaching service. In almost every school in Dominica today, there are teachers who are for and teachers who are against, and there are spies who will report to parliamentary representatives as to who is for the government and who is not for the government. When we look at something at the bedrock of village councils that was supposed to have been a unifying entity and an arm of government for the development of Dominica, almost every village council now has become some political play tool, football for the government, where village councils in Dominica do not even have that authority to bring people together and to be that unifying force in the respective villages. Even that has gone out of the way. And so we are experiencing, what you call, in the midst of that, we are experiencing what I call a utility earthquake. A utility earthquake. Because in the midst of all of what I'm telling you, there is this symbolic darkness. We have experienced that political, social, economic, religious darkness in a symbolic way. And today, in real terms, we are experiencing the tangible darkness. So we're not only in an atmosphere of darkness created by, we are living in real darkness where people cannot even put on a switch to read a book or to iron their clothes or to boil a kettle or to chill their meat or to have a warm bath. So we are not only experiencing a darkness, a kind of ominous darkness that is hovering over Dominica because of the kind of leadership that we have, but in the midst of that, in the midst of that, how you call it, atmosphere of fear and insecurity and lack of safety and economic instability, that's a kind of a darkness when people cannot pay their bills, okay, and they don't have proper health care, and there's a growing level of crime, and people are not secure in knowing that people who deliver the word of God are authentic. And that's a very frightening thing, It's a very frightening thing if people who are supposed to be delivering the word of God lack authenticity. This is supposed to be the moral compass upon which everything pivots. And we are in this vastness of insecurity. So that's one kind of darkness. And today we are experiencing, it's like in Hurricane David, we are going through the eye of the storm. We are already in a storm of uncertainty. And so here comes that utility earthquake of Domlec not being able to supply electricity to people. And guess what? Government departments cannot function. Schools cannot function. The small manufacturing factory centers cannot function. The banks cannot function. The productive sectors cannot function. The restaurants cannot run. Okay? And above all, the hospital cannot function. I am at a loss to find out the people who were supposed to be doing dialysis at the hospital on a regular basis. Have they been able to access the dialysis machines at the hospital? People who were supposed to have emergency operations at the hospital, have they been able to have those operations? The people who have been in ICU, depending on the electricity supply to keep them alive, have they been able to function? Our airport, the major sections in Dominica, that's why I call it, it's an earthquake. So yes, I think in the midst of all of that, if I were to go back to Quo Vadis Dominica, just as Peter was fleeing Rome, as Rome was falling, and Jesus came to him, I think now, just as Jesus came to him to ask him Quo Vadis, I think now Dominica needs a liberator. As Peter found his liberator, I think now Dominica needs a Messiah. As Peter found his Messiah, I think now Dominica needs a savior. As Peter met his savior. But you know what? In order for us to find our liberator, our savior, and our Messiah in Dominica, we have to be prepared to make the sacrifice like Peter made. we have to be able to return to Jerusalem and be prepared to be crucified upside down. Because the question is, where does the power now lie in Dominica? Well, it's a frightening thing. We know the power of Dominica does not lie within the government of Dominica. We know the power of Dominica lies outside. We know Dominica is being, because he says, he help me, Dr. Fountain, he who controls the purse pulls the strings. And we do not know who is actually controlling the purse outside of Dominica. It could be drug dealers. It could be the mafia. It could be international terrorists. We do not know. We do not know who are the connections of Anthony Hayden. We do not know who are the people who have bought millions of dollars of passports. We do not know where their sources of income come. There could be international terrorists from Iran. And God knows to what extent they may have our leader choked in his throat, pulling the strings and commanding him how to do. That's why we have to think, my dear people, this change and turn of things isn't going to come easy. Because if we think that it is just only about turning a leaf for political directorate, we might just be surprised there might be a band of terrorists and brigands who might be denying us that opportunity. And that is a frightening thing. Because if it means that the purse of Dominica is being controlled by international terrorists and mafias and drug dealers who have our passport money, they are not going to let go very easily. They are not going to say, make sure that Thompson Fountain and the UWP or the Freedom Party just going to deny them of the opportunity to be in control. It's a dangerous phenomenon. It's a frightening thing. It's a frightening thing. And who knows, we may just hear one day when Dr. Thompson is on his way to Sudan or Eritrea, something happens to him. This is the world in which we live in. It's a frightening thing. And we mustn't take it lightly. Because we have turned over the control of Dominica to an unknown entity, to an unknown machination, to an unknown mechanism. And we do not know to what extent they have a level of control on Dominica and the directorate on Dominica. Because right now, if you look at how things are happening in Dominica, we are solely in the ambit of autocracy. One man is speaking. You listened to the press conference yesterday. I. Does Dominica have a minister for energy? Does Dominica have a minister for health? Does Dominica have a minister for national security? And so it renders to my mind the fact that we have an autocracy in Dominica, and it renders this and just says that the lack of public accountability is there. Now, when we look at all and we throw that back to what is happening with all this electoral reform, we have to make the connection. If we have to solidly zero in on the change that we want, we have to make a connection between election, government, and development. Development isn't going to come without a solid government. And you cannot have a solid government if you do not have free and fair elections. And so that is why we must continue to champion the cause for free and fair elections. Because it is free and fair election that is going to give us a government that is accountable, a government that is solid, a government that is ready to put Dominica on a foothold for proper development. And we cannot continue to do it divided as we are. We cannot continue to do it divided as we are. When we look at the statistics of Dominica, Mr. Gregoire, Dr. Andre, Lambie, and Dr. Fontaine, 65 to 70,000 people. Pointe-à-Pitre in Guadeloupe has more than 60,000 people. Okay? Barataria and Morva in Trinidad has more than 60,000 people. Kingston, Jamaica has more than 60,000 people. St. Lucia just there, right? The west coast of St. Lucia has more than, so the population of Dominica can fit into Pointe-à-Pitre. The population of Dominica can fit into Morva and Barataria in Trinidad. The population of Dominica can fit into Kingston. What is even more what is even more alarming, if you go to New York and you know the co-op cities, right? The entire population in Dominica can fit into 2 of those buildings. Okay? And so the call on us now as a people is to realize that we cannot allow ourselves, as small as we are, to become insignificant because of the kind of leadership that we have. And I'm going to be bold enough tonight, to ask Dominicans a few questions. I really wonder. Tonight, I want to ask the question, I want to ask the question tonight. I wonder if while Dominicans are in darkness, without electricity, the Prime Minister and the head of government doesn't have electricity at his home, while Dominicans are in darkness. I wonder how many of those ministers tonight have generators at their home, where they can preserve their meat and they can use their irons and they can have their fridges running and they can drink cold water. I wonder how many. I wonder how many of the protected few in Dominica now who are enjoying the spoils of Dominica can enjoy watching Netflix and using their computer, while the majority of Dominicans are denied that luxury and that opportunity. Very important question to be asked, Very important question to be asked. I wonder if the Minister of Health at his home has electricity, while the nurses at the hospital have no electricity to do their work. These are important questions and simple questions to be asked, And then, based on the fact that we have an autocratic government today, I think it is time we need to call on these ministers of government to step aside, get out of the way, because they are useless. They are not functioning. All these people who hold the different portfolios of Dominica, they are a waste of time, because when we look at it, every major issue in Dominica is the Prime Minister who has to speak on it. They don't exist. They are not necessary. They serve no purpose. They cannot even speak on issues that fall under their own portfolio. Because he comes and says, I have to. Where are they? So they should step aside. They are not necessary. It's not important that they are there, and allow the country to breathe. And maybe that could be the first step. That could be the first step of us reaching where we want to reach tonight, where we want to reach tonight. Lastly, Mr. Gregoire, I cannot end without looking at serious threat to justice in Dominica. In the history of Dominica, if we recall, at one time we believed that Leo Austin was the worst Attorney General of Dominica. And I challenge any Dominican to, on one hand, name me 3 things that Leo Austin did wrong. We have an Attorney General today in Dominica, and I'm not going to be afraid to say it, who's worse than Rasputin. And if you read the history, I'm sure Dr. Andre maybe knows who I'm talking about. If you read the history and the life story of Rasputin and his influence on the dictatorship of Russia, the utterances, behaviors, and I looked at the Attorney General and his presentations at this. I said, does this man realize that he's the Attorney General of Dominica? Does he realize that he's not supposed to be a spokesperson on behalf of the government, but that he's supposed to be representing the people, representing the people's interests, protecting the legal rights of Dominicans, advising the government of Dominica of how best they can secure and protect the legal rights of Dominicans? And all along the way, all he was doing was acting as a little moose boy, so to speak, for the government. That is not the position of an Attorney General. If you are to look at if you are to read the responsibilities of the Attorney General in the Constitution of Dominica, okay, especially when he's not an elected person but an appointed person, it speaks volumes to what manifestly was displayed by the person today who holds the office of the Attorney General in Dominica. And when some time ago I understood that he goes to Dubai, what does he go to Dubai for? To sell passports? I'm just asking. What does he go to? What does an attorney general have to do with going to Dubai? What is his role? What is his function? What is the purpose? What is the need? What is the responsibility? And so he should be held accountable. The people of Dominica, just as they stoned Leo Austin out of office, they need to now demand of him, does he understand what he is supposed to be doing? Because you see, if you look at the story of Rasputin in Russia and his influence on the governance then, and you look and you listen to this Attorney General in the House of Assembly, particularly in the House of Assembly as we've been doing, and most recently in the electoral thing, you will see that behind the cynicism of the behavior of our head of government, you can see the wiggling influence of this Attorney General. And so the Prime Minister has to be very careful. Just as perhaps Patrick John was advised not to listen too much to Leo Austin, this Prime Minister has to be guarded and mindful of the fact that he needs to pay close attention to what he's listening to from this Attorney General of the government of Dominica today. That's something that has to be brought on the table as we speak about all these governance issues that are affecting us. Because I'm not sure if we realize the importance, the pivotal role that the Attorney General plays, right, in the study of good governance in a country. Okay? More than any minister of government, more than any, established public servant, the Attorney General plays a pivotal role as an advisor to the government on behalf of the people. In other words, the Attorney General is supposed to advise the government that, listen, what you guys are doing is not going to affect my people well. You have to watch it. You have to step aside. You have to think over. And so a lot of these people are living behind the mask of the head of government. And sometimes we let them go. We let them escape without paying any attention to them. We focus very much on the head of state, or the head of government, sorry, the Prime Minister. But I think the time is nigh for us to focus on the key players behind the scenes who might just be influencing the trajectory that we have today, one of which is the Attorney General, if we're talking about governance. And it has been made very manifest, very clear. And he showed his true colors based on his responses, the verbiage of his responses, the articulation and the wording of his responses during the consultations on electoral reform. And that is what I'm going to tell you, Mr. Gregoire, Mr. Dr. Andre, Dr. Thompson. I don't think we're going to have electoral reform in Dominica. I think it's a fait accompli that they know they're not going to give us electoral reform. Because rather than listening to some of these acolytes who were just repeating things, if we listen to the Attorney General correctly, he was more of an apologist, okay, than a facilitator. And I tell you, that should be a key sign to tell us that all of our cry for electoral reform in Dominica is not going to reach anywhere. But I would like to call on Dominicans tonight to recognize that we are Dominicans together. We should not continue to allow the misguided political directorate and governance we have in Dominica to divide us any longer. We are strong as a people. We are very resourceful as Dominicans. We are very powerful as Dominicans based on the fact that we have an indomitable fighting spirit which must not be quenched. That we have a determined attitude. We must not allow people to allow us to evoke fear in us, so that we lose that determination and that courage to take a stand for what is right. That we must not allow the elements and the seeds of division to allow Dominicans not to have a fair share and play a key stake in the development of their country. That they must not allow people to deny them an opportunity to be a productive force and factor in ensuring that they invest their time, their talent, their treasure, and their energies in Dominica. At the end of the day, Dominica is ours to build. If anything happens tomorrow in the international scenes, we can run back home. Dominicans have a place which there is no other place in the world like Dominica. And we need to realize that. And we need to recognize that all of us, we must be undaunted in our spirit. We must not be timid. We must not back down. We must not be fearful. We must not allow the forces of money and power and prestige and privilege to allow us to cower and to say, okay, that's not our thing. Too many people are sitting by and saying this one should do that and that one should do that. I want to call on all Dominicans this morning to start being brave, to start standing up, to start walking, to start doing what they have to do, to be unabashed and unafraid, whether you work in the government offices, whether you are in the police force, whether you are in the fire service, whether you are in the teaching service, whether you're a public servant, whether you are a permanent secretary or somebody in government, you must not allow fear to overcome you. And you have to be able to develop that strength and resolve to step forward and to begin to take the incremental steps bit by bit to stand in the position of fortitude, of conviction, and of determination to decide enough is enough. And that in order for us to move forward, Quo Vadis Dominica means we have to turn around like Peter, go back into Rome, face the authorities that are there, and be prepared to make the sacrifices for the sake of Dominica, which belongs to all of us.
Thank you, Simeon, for that. And here's a note that somebody just sent me based on some of the words that you've just spoken, Simeon. They said, whatever you fear most has no power. It is your fear that has the power over you. Dr. Thompson Fontaine, I want to go to you because, you see what's happening to us with the time here now. It's winding down, and I want to give you a chance to go to bed as well. So, let's get back to you. Give us some of your thoughts. I mean, all of what you've heard so far. The question is, where do we go from here? I said it. Simeon said it. Dr. Andre said it. It is very unlikely that this regime will want to deliver electoral reform in terms of best practices to Dominicans. Based on those two emails that we spoke about, which was the genesis of this resistance to electoral reform for fear of somebody losing their re-election. Where do we go from here, Dr. Fontaine? What do we mobilize the people, as Simeon is saying, so that they can step out and say, listen, we are demanding electoral reform and we're not going back until we get it?
Yeah, so at the end of the day is what the people want, right? I just happened to be looking at a documentary earlier tonight, and it was about the French Revolution. When in 1798, the people of France felt that they were being oppressed by the monarchy, and the women in particular, who felt their their backs were against the walls. They mobilized themselves and they took to the streets. Then we had the famous Battle of the Bastille. A number of them got injured and killed and some. By the end of the day, they were able to overthrow the monarchy and establish democracy in France that continues to thrive today. I think there comes a time when the people decides that enough is enough. And if the government does not want to give the people what they want, at the end of the day, it's the people that decides. After all, it is supposed to be a government for and by the people. And they should be doing the bidding of the people. It is clear the Dominican public and every right-thinking Dominican believes that electoral reform is the way to go. Everybody wants the playing field that is level. so that when you cast your votes, you know that if there are a majority of people who are like-minded, you will get that government. That's what you want. You do not want a situation where you cast your votes and the whole system is already geared against you. So I believe ultimately, Mr. G, to answer your question, it depends on the people of Dominica. They're the ones to decide that we are going to get our reforms, and that they need to continue to demand that that legislation that is going forward has those, at least these three basic things. That is, it clearly defines the residency criteria in terms of who can vote and what makes you able to vote. If we get a clean voters list that reflects only people who are eligible to vote, we get the voters identification card that clarifies the voter, so that this business of going to New Jersey or going to New York and telling people because you have the same last name as your grandmother, you can come and vote on your grandmother's name in Dominica and get away with it. That will be a thing of the past. When we can completely shut that out, these are the demands that we have to keep putting forward. These are the right things to do. And not even the Attorney General should be able to prevent that from happening. So ultimately, the people have the power. They need to understand this. The power in the people is far greater than the people in power. And people need to understand that. Ultimately, it's about us. It's about we, the people. And so we can do and we can continue to demand that at the end of the day, we will get the reform. I'm not of those who subscribe, they're not going to get it. I believe that we will, one way or the other. In our local parlance, we say by the hook or by the crook, we're going to get those reforms.
And thank you for that, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. Dr. Andre, the time is coming. We have to be really, I consider Dr. Thompson Fontaine. I might go back to him and to Simeon for their quick closing remarks, but I want to come to you and then of course I will come to you again for your final remarks. But Dr. Andre, Dr. Thompson Fontaine has said it. Simeon said it, you said it. You need to unify all of the people, all of the forces, the opposition forces, the civic organization. You need to unify them and educate them and make them aware of what is at stake and make the connection between free and fair elections and good governance and the results that they're seeing now on the ground. Simeon made the connection about the electricity, and he asked the question, who has and who does not have electricity? Dr. Andre, I would think that one of the solutions for the people to make their demands known, I'm thinking if just 450 people, if the opposition forces can unite and organize and just try to bring 450 people from each constituency somewhere together and to say, listen, we're demanding that we get our electoral reform. We need a change of government. We need better policies on the ground that is going to give us the kinds of development that we want. The people can say that because they have the power. It's something called the people's power. Do you think, Dr. Andre, that if that can be organized, that means if you have 450 people from each of 21 constituencies, you have 9,000 to 10,000 people gathered. I believe that would be a message that would be well sent to every politician in the country. Your thoughts, Dr. Andre?
There's no mystery to what has to be done. The fact of the matter is the people have to be given hope. They have to be given confidence in their own abilities to effect meaningful change. They have to be given confidence to remember, as many persons of the previous generation were taught, you are the artificer of your own future. You are the one who will shape it as it should be shaped. And it seems to me that if there's a collective awakening that, look, we have to ensure that no prime minister will boast about foreigners owning $240 million and shipping it elsewhere, while Dominicans on the ground have to settle with a pittance, even if they're able to find jobs. So we have to have that self-confidence. We have to shake off those feelings of inferiority, that somehow we are subservient to some foreign entity. You have foreigners who come to Dominica broke, and they walk away with 30 million pieces of silver. While you have Dominican businessmen and women who've been toiling in the wilderness for decades, and they can just manage to build their homes and to provide a modest income for themselves. We have fly-by-night investors. We have hoteliers who've been in the business for decades. They are literally starved out of existence. They are foreclosed, while other persons with no experience whatsoever in hoteling receive the ability to sell passports and build hotels which are totally unnecessary. And we know the justification for these edifices. We have to ask ourselves, as a Dominican in Canada once asked, "Mwe pa moun tou? Am I not entitled to the wealth created in my country? Must I stand by and see these people walk in and walk out? Persons who are not as educated as you, persons who are not hardworking as you, but persons who are infinitely more crooked than you, just stealing your birthright? Should we be satisfied with that state of affairs? We have to take upon ourselves, dig deep, and realize that we deserve better. Dominica is ours. Our fathers, our mothers, our grandparents, our great-grandparents have toiled in this place, whether in Wesley or in Vacaz or in Penville. And it's on their backs that we can say that we've acquired a decent education. And it's on their toil that we can come to the realization that this is ours and we should not sit by while it is stolen from under our feet. It's not a difficult task, but coming together is critical to that redemptive process. We have it within ourselves to come together. But let's face it, it's a difficult task because the wounds of division, the wounds of betrayal, where family members are ratting out on their own family, where they're enjoying the free this and the free that at the expense of their own family members, where neighbors are selling it out other just so they can get and enjoy a pittance, where they're wearing red, for God's sakes, even to the washroom, to show their allegiance. We have to break those bonds of divisions, and we have to embrace a much wider version and vision of ourselves. I will not say more.
Well, we will be coming back to you for your closing remarks, Dr. Andre, but let me just go over to Simeon. With closing remarks, Simeon, because I know you've said a mouthful already, but there must be something additional that you want to leave with the people, the very fine people who are with us on Facebook, or with us on YouTube, or with us every nook and cranny of Dominica, everywhere globally. I want to reach out and thank them for being with us, even at this late hour already.
Yeah.
Simeon, your final comments?
But you see, Mr. Gregoire, I will want to use my final comments based on my previous introduction. I am literally concerned now, okay, that we may be losing Dominica. I'm literally concerned now that we may be losing Dominica. And we're at a junction now where we have to try our best to see that we can rescue Dominica. Okay, that's why I have to ask the question, Quo vadis Dominica? People have lost hope. You speak to 9 out of 10 Dominicans and they want to leave. Every other young person you meet in this country, their words are, I can't wait to get out of this country. Okay? And this should not be the narrative of Dominicans. This should not be the language that people should be speaking of such a lovely place like Dominica. Okay? And so the question is, what is our ambition? If things are not good and we find that we are hopeless or we are not satisfied with how things are, we need to come to a resolute determination whereby we have to say that let us see how we can turn around the leadership that Dominica has now. And when you really have to look at it, when you have to look at the fact that, and it's a crying shame that the amount of money that has been obtained from the sale of Dominican passports, and you compare that to what we have gotten in return for it, there is a major gap. Our schools in Dominica today are not properly sourced, and we're selling passports. The hospital doesn't have medication, and we're selling passports. We don't even have adequate generation capacity for 75,000 people, and we're selling passports. I mean, if the government was really serious, don't you think they could have just used some of that CBI money and tell Anthony Hayden, can you send us 4 generators from Dubai? What's this going to take? All these rich people who are in the Middle East, and anybody who has been to the Middle East will know that they have all kind of generation capacity. All they have to say is, Anthony Hayden, when you send in down the backhoes and the caterpillars and so forth, the airport, put 4 generators on the ship and send it to Dominica because it's our money. Instead, we have to be in darkness and somebody has our money somewhere out there. And as Dr. Andre alluded to a while ago, we're extending our airstrip, okay? And we have to send for a company from Barbados to that. Just permit me a few minutes to think. Last week again, I mean, I was literally heartbroken when I saw the groundbreaking for 4 schools in Dominica with contracts being awarded to the Chinese. Bear with me, Mr. Gregoire. The old Dominica Grammar School in 1961 was built by Dominicans. The old Goodwill Primary School in 1966 was built by Dominicans. The Portsmouth Secondary School was built by Dominicans. All the major primary schools around Dominica were built by Dominicans. E.H. Charles, Mr. Luke, and those people. The Pierre Charles Secondary School was built by Dominicans. The Northeast Comprehensive School was built by Dominicans. The Isaiah Thomas Secondary School was built by Dominicans. Huh? And that was in the 60s and in the 70s. Today in 2023, you come in and tell me you're building 4 schools. And you have to go all the way to China for people to build the schools in Dominica. I mean, if we cannot open our eyes and see that this is a government who is not, who does not have on their priority the empowerment of Dominicans. That is what government is for. One of the key roles of government is to empower its people, to allow its people to have economic viability. You extending the Melville Hall Airport. My God, the road from Melville Hall to Roseau through the Transinsular Road was built by Dominicans. Mountains were cut, bridges were built. The road from Portsmouth to Roseau was built by Dominicans. The entire East Coast Road, Dr. Fountain will tell you, from La Plaine to all, was built by Dominicans. Look at the terrain that these people had to cut just to extend a little airstrip on a flat piece of land. You have to send to Barbados for it and send the money to Barbados. I mean, it hurts my heart when we look at the healthcare system, right? When we look at the healthcare system in Dominica, Marigot Hospital, I lived in Calibishi for 10 years. And I saw the very efficient healthcare system that existed in Marigot. There was a hospital in Marigot, and every village from Calibishi to Atkinson at the health center, manned by 2 nurses, with how many doctors? And if you got a cut on a Sunday afternoon, you could go to the nurse's home and get it stitched. Today, you come in and tell me in Marigot Hospital, we have to wait so many years before we get proper health care. I mean, come on. Where are we going to in Dominica? And when are Dominicans going to realize that instead of giving up hope, they have to be able to rekindle their energies and claim what is theirs? Dominica belongs to us. Claim what is yours. Possess what is yours. And that is what we have to do if we have to find solutions. Dominicans cannot expect Dr. Fountain or Lennox Linton or Mr. Thing to come and do it for them. That's one man. And they keep saying all the time, leadership, leadership. You mean Dominicans are not seeing for themselves? They're not seeing for themselves that they are sitting down at their home while the Chinese are building schools for them. They're not seeing for themselves that they are sitting down in Marigot, Wesley, Woodford Hill on the side of the road when Barbadians are extending the airstrip. They're not seeing that for themselves. Can they see that for themselves, that before a minister is sick, a helicopter comes and takes him up and brings him overseas? While they have to struggle and wait in a clinic for 10 hours before they can see a doctor. They're not seeing that for themselves. And they're seeing for themselves as they drive around in Cottage and they drive around in Mont Daniel and Vegas, the kind of houses the ministers are building, while they themselves cannot even cover their houses. And they're seeing the kind of four-wheel drives that the ministers are driving when they themselves cannot afford a vehicle. Aren't they seeing that for themselves? And they're seeing for themselves how ministers' children are being sent overseas to the best of universities, while their children are in Midwestern and Grambling cannot even pay their scholarship. They are seeing that for themselves. Dominicans are seeing that for themselves, and yet they are just sitting down there starstruck, okay, with some kind of expectant, how you call it, mendicancy, afraid to take action because they will not get, but they are not getting now. They are afraid to stand up because they will not get. They are being denied now. They are not getting now. They are being denied now. They are on the sidelines now. They are on the periphery now. What have they to lose again? And so they have to realize, okay, they have to take ownership of the process. Okay, and as you rightly said, come out, take a stand. You know, I am one person I can tell you, when I see some of these ministers nowadays, I shame them. I tell them, don't call me. Have nothing to tell me. And there are some people who have to compromise. We complain about the government using the money, but then when a parliamentary representative uses the state money for a feast, everybody in the opposition and the UWP, they're jumping up to Triple K and Signal Ban in the midst of parliamentarians who are wasting money on village feasts. Huh? We take part in all their social activities and we blend in all their wastage that is happening. Huh? What is that? It's giving endorsement to it, you know? And I think we have to be brave enough now to say enough is enough and to stand for something, because we're falling for everything and we're falling for nothing, and we're getting absolutely nothing. When I saw in 2019 the number of students who came home to vote, right? Today, look at what's happening to them. They were promised that if they don't come home to vote, they would lose their scholarship. Well, they voted and they have still lost their scholarships. Their university fees are still not being paid. I saw many of them come home in 2019 to vote. Okay? One of whom I know came home to vote, and today he cannot complete his university education. So, I mean, enough of false promises. Okay? Enough of that kind of false messianic complex. Enough of this starstruck mendicancy kind of mentality whereby we think we have to be afraid to speak and we have to be so awed. And one of the things that had me puzzled yesterday was when I was listening to the press conference. The reporters sat down there, they are being spewed absolute garbage and nonsense, and they are clapping without any critical thought or analytical thought, and they are clapping. Clapping what? You're being spewed nonsense and rhetoric and irresponsible statements, and you're so starstruck by somebody who tries to mama guy you like a spider in a cobweb, and you're clapping at that without even dissecting the information that is placed before you and question the kind of nonsense that you are hearing. You know, so I mean, in the ending tonight, I think I'd like to say that Dominicans need to open their eyes first and foremost. They need to get out from that stupor that they are in, because I don't know if there is some kind of bush that has been burnt and has been spread over Dominicans, or some kind of plane that has passed and spray water over Dominicans of some sort, or I just do not know, or some vapor has been driven around the streets of Roseau and in every village to stupefy Dominicans. I don't know what has happened to them. I really don't know what has happened to them, because they don't seem to see, They don't seem to hear. They don't seem to understand things that the carpet is being pulled from right under their feet, and they don't see it. I do not know what aura that this gentleman carries with him that creates a sort of a semi-magnetic field that fries people's brain and diminishes their senses, that when they are in his presence they just become mannequins, you know, without any tangible substance in them, you know. And we have to be able to champion that thing of letting Dominicans see and not to be afraid. I want to end tonight by telling Dominicans there's 2 scripture verses that they must be mindful of. Never be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. And greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And we can do anything through Christ who strengthens us. We must go by that. We must go by that because the flesh dies. The flesh is transient. We cannot be afraid of human flesh. Human flesh is just human flesh. And the human flesh that we are afraid of is full of narcissism, egoism, and false sense of importance. So we are afraid of absolutely nothing. Okay? And Dominicans are more than that. Dominicans are more than narcissism and egoism and self-pride. We are very resourceful people. If you go back to the 70s and the 80s, okay? Dr. Andre mentioned about Creole Festival. Do Dominicans know that in 1978, during our independence, when we had our music festival in the Windsor Park, there was not one foreign band? We had 3 nights of events. You should remember that, Mr. Gregoire. There was not one foreign band there on that section of the Windsor Park. We had a week of activities leading up to independence, and there was not one foreign artist, and the place was full. Okay? So and what is happening to us today? We have to regain our identity. We have to regain our prowess. We have to be inspired to take control of the resources that belong to us and claim it and send an unequivocal statement that Dominica belongs to us. Okay? And we must not be afraid or step aside for anybody else who wants to deny us of the opportunity to take the reins of the advancement of Dominica and the future generation into our hands, and to support those who are being persecuted and prosecuted. There are people who are fighting on our behalf, like Dr. Fountain, Mr. Linton. They are both being persecuted and prosecuted, while the rest of Dominica becomes very timid and those kind of things there. So I just you know, I'm a very try to use scripture, because let's face it, Dominica is supposed to be the land of the Lord, a Christian country. So I want to tell them, if they are afraid because Dr. Thompson and the leaders are being persecuted and prosecuted, well, let me tell them something. Paul was beheaded. Peter was crucified upside down. John was sent to India. The apostles were burnt at the stake, but the early Christians, as humble as they are, they stood up and they brought down the Roman Empire.
Well, that's a nice note to end on, Simeon, and thank you for that. Dr. Fountain, I'm going to ask your closing. I'm not going to ask you to find that spray that Simeon is talking about. That's the antidote for whatever spray or thing was burnt over Dominica. I will leave that for Dr. Andre. He's more versed in these kinds of matters. Dr. Fountain, your final remarks. And I think we all say the same thing. With people who are concerned for their country, who want Dominica to belong to Dominicans, they should get together in their numbers and demand just that, to take the country back. Your final words, Dr. Fountain?
Yeah, Mr. G, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for being a part of this tremendous panel tonight. And so many thoughts are going through my mind. I'm not even sure where to start. Quo Vadis, Dominica. You know, how did we get there? The thought in my mind is, and I'm listening to Simeon, I'm listening to Dr. Andre, and I'm thinking, it's something I've thought about quite a bit. I have spent a lot of time thinking about how did we get to where we are? How did we get to the point where persons who were once proud to work are now equally proud to be depending on the government on a handout from the government? How did that happen to us as Dominicans? How did it happen that Dominicans in the diaspora who are quote unquote enjoying the good life think there's absolutely nothing wrong in taking $1,000 or $500 and a ticket, coming to Dominica to vote in the morning and disappearing in the evening and think nothing is wrong with this, and do that with a smile on their face like it's a big joke. And now the country is plunged into darkness. Everything that we talked about earlier, the poverty, the pain, the suffering, the inability for people to meet the basic needs. How did we get to that? How did we allow that to happen to us? You know, it is something I think that years after we're gone, sociologists will probably be able to figure out what went wrong with Dominica. But I want to encourage those of us that still believe that our better days are ahead. And these are the people I want to talk to tonight. But I believe that there are Dominicans who believe that our better days are ahead of us. But to get to that better place, to get to that point, nuni putiwe go washla shimea, go pitan washla kia shimea. There is a rock in the road, a big stone in the road that we need to set aside. We need to move away. We need to get it out of the way. And once that is done, that is how we're going to move forward. And that becomes a question. How do we move that rock in the road? And that's the question I want to leave Dominicans with tonight. To appeal to our consciences, to appeal to the conscience of those who have imposed this government on us. Because we've seen, it is clear, this government does not have the popular support of the people living in Dominica. That has been clear for the past 3 election cycles. What has made the difference is individuals coming from abroad to impose this government. That has been the difference. The numbers are there, the statistics confirm that. So I do not want us to lose hope. I do not want us to lose hope on electoral reform. I do not want us to lose hope on a better economy for Dominica. We have the skills, we have the abilities, we have the people who are prepared to work, who are prepared to roll their sleeves and work in the best interest of Dominica, not in their own best interest. I remember in 2011, been 12 years now, I remember when I challenged the Prime Minister. I went publicly to challenge the Prime Minister about his bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Because I was working in Washington, D.C., and a way was opened up for me. I was able to get leave, a month's leave, and go to the Cayman Island to work in the offshore sector. And information was brought to my attention. And I challenged the Prime Minister on radio publicly. I challenged him to tell the people of Dominica the amounts of monies he had in those bank accounts in the Seychelles, in the Cayman, not Seychelles, in the Cayman Islands. So I've said that before. Some people may have heard it, some people may have not, maybe hearing for the very first time. But that was way back in 2011. And at that time, it was already into the millions of dollars. Now, many years later, many more passports sold, many more deals done with diplomatic passports for 2,000 by there, another 2 million by there, $1.5 million by there, and so on. Apartments by there as payment. So much more deals have been done. How much more has he accumulated? And all that time, as the Prime Minister and his close followers are going up like that, the rest of the population, the other 59,999 are coming down this way. So we have one person going up, the others coming down, down, down. And I ask the question, how do they get there? Why do we allow that to continue to happen to us as a people? Why do the majority of right-thinking Dominicans continue to take this crap from this government? And that's the kind of questions we need to address ourselves too. These are the kind of issues we need to raise, because we have a country that is going nowhere fast. We have a country that has lost its way. We have a country that is blinded. We have a country that is, our young people are taking all their frustrations on each other, and very soon they'll be taking all their frustrations on the grown-ups. We have a country that is on the brink. It's on the brink. It's on a tipping point right now. And so, Dominicans, the question is, what are we going to do about it? It is for all of us to settle on. It's for all of us to decide what we will do about that situation in Dominica. Good night.
Good night to you, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. Now, Dr. Andre, I know that your Creole is excellent. And so, Nuteni Boyo. No tiwe boyo, no mete pai.
I take it that means good night. Good night. Good night to you.
So, Sanu Vese, vie tiwe pai la.
Actual man need bagas.
Dr. Andre, you get the last word.
Well, let me congratulate both Simeon and Dr. Fontaine for superb presentations this evening. Very inspiring, very sobering, very relevant, very poignant. And let me thank the host who's done an excellent job. And let me thank Lambi, who's always at the consoles, the epitome of all that is good in terms of service and duty to country. And let me thank those who've remained glued on listening to their respective, whether it's radio or social media or whatever it is. That's wonderful, and we thank you very deeply. Dominica is in a crisis, and yes, it appears to be a hopeless case. But let me just remind our listeners that until the 10 lepers heard that Jesus was in their village, they had no hope. Let me remind our listeners that until Lazarus heard the command to get up and get out, he had no hope. And as one preacher said before, when the persons downstairs saw Lazarus getting up, they all rushed to the application office to change their name to Lazarus. There is always hope. And the difficulty is this, as both of my fellow panelists have alluded, this is a difficult road that we have to travel. This is a valley which is strewn with traps and pitfalls. But as the folks walk through the valley of death, they say to themselves, they fear no evil. And Mr. Joseph posed a great question. What is the genesis of this myopia, this passivity of the Dominican people? I think 3 words can best explain it. Money, money, money. It is money. And it is the widespread use of money to stifle the creative energies of a people, to make them dependent, to make them prepared to sell out their souls, their own brothers, their own sisters, to have police officers even stand as spectators while his or her brother is brutalized, and the brutality is caught on video. We have to break those chains of dependency. We have to break those chains of subserviency. We have to break the chicken syndrome. That is to say, you can beat us up, and in 5 minutes, we forget about the beating. We have to change the mentality of that poor wretch in La Plaine, who, after he was beaten up in the basement of a former pastor, for God's sakes, said upon receiving a poor excuse of a house, "Beat me again. I want more licks from you." We have to liberate ourselves from mental slavery. This is not rocket science. This is not difficult. There are persons out there who have it much more difficult than us. In fact, I had occasion to reflect on the passage of a country in Europe called Portugal, still one of the poorest in the thing. They were under dictatorship, fascist dictatorship, from the 30s to on about 1974. They defeated the forces of fascism and violence and brutality. And they called their revolution the Carnation Revolution. They did not raise a single weapon to defeat that repugnant regime. They just decided after one time, enough is enough. But we don't have to wait so long. The power lies within us. The conditions are such today that we are already seeing the fruits of the poison tree, the gas prices, the electricity, the poverty, the unemployment, the wanton migration of folks, which is their right, because folks typically gravitate to opportunity. But the sale of everything you hold sacred, the parrots, the land, the passports, the village, all up for sale. Dominicans will rise, because at some point, when they reach the edge of the precipice, they will say, no more, no more, no mas. I will not participate in my own self-destruction by lying dead while those leaders who sold us out trample over us as if we are insignificant. There will come a time, and I hope that the time is now. We have a right to hope. We have a right to dream, and we have a right to dig deep within to rescue ourselves. We are no lesser than anybody else in the Eastern Caribbean. As I said, Nusi Muntu. Thank you very much, and good night.
And thank you so much, Dr. Andre. As we leave you, here's what I want to say in closing, going back to the beginning. 4 things I think that need to be done, in my view. The Dominica Business Forum has taken the lead and brought all the various groups and political parties, all the civic organizations, the churches and so on together to participate in its consultations. It should immediately establish the National Reform Laws and Regulations Committee with a drafts person to finalize the draft electoral reforms and regulations. You cannot leave it up to the regime to do that. They will never deliver a free and fair playing field in those reform laws. I believe that once that has happened and the committee has got an attorney, a draft person to put those proposals and is recommended into the draft laws and recommendation and regulations of Sir Dennis Byron, they should then bring 450 people from each constituency and gather 10,000 people somewhere and for them to say to their government and to their attorney general and to the electoral commission, these are the laws and regulations that we want. We believe those are what is going to deliver the free and fair elections on a level playing field. And then let the chips fall where they may. As demand that we have free and fair and fresh elections within 6 months after those reforms have been tabled and passed in Parliament. Whoever win. But the point is you'll have established a level playing field. And that is a time when you move now to pursue good governance that will implement the appropriate policy environment to foster national security, safety, foreign earnings investment, growth, wealth for Dominicans, by transforming and modernizing the structures of Dominica's natural economic pillars for small business and medium-sized businesses, for agricultural farmers or manufacturers, or processing and renewable energy, for nature tourism and cultural, music, arts, and appropriate amenities and other things, and restore. Let good governance now must restore the integrity of Dominica's name in the international community and in the diplomatic circles among our leading democratic allies, and forestall any further travel restrictions and detrimental negative international collateral damage for Dominicans at home and abroad, as we have been experiencing recently. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank every one of you who's been with us on Facebook and on YouTube and throughout the length and breadth of Dominica and in the global community. Thank you for staying with us. I hope we shared something with you tonight. We did not take your calls, and I'm so sorry about that. But the way the discussion was going, I forgot to ask Lambi to stop and take some calls. I want to apologize to you sincerely for that. The next week, I hope that we'll have some people who can talk to us about this energy situation in Dominica. I think this thing is dire, and the poor people of Dominica are feeling the squeeze more than anybody else. So I want to bring some experts here for us to talk about that, to see what is the solution going forward. We cannot continue to allow poor people just keep suffering and every time to be holding the wrong end of the stick. I think we have to bring to light what is really happening. All these fancy things I'm hearing from press conferences make no sense. As somebody said, is it Simeon who said that, or Dr. Andre, or Thompson? Why don't we just let our friends give us 4 generators that will do the job? We have a friend there in China. Why don't we ask them for enough solar panels to cover the country? We spent over $150 million probably already on geothermal. We could have put solar panels everywhere to take care of that problem. But instead, we're saying we want to wait. I don't think we're ever going to get this geothermal thing for the next 5 years. Are these poor people going to wait for 5 years? For 5 years, they're going to have load shedding and their fridge empty. And that cannot make sense. We have to get serious as a people, and we have to unite to demand what we really want. Take our country back. Gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much. Lambi, thank you. Sherwin, thank you. Thank you for being with us here tonight. So everybody, I hope you have a great night for what is left of it. Thompson, take care. Simeon.
Thompson.
Dr. Andre. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh, na 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 na. Oh, yeah. Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by what's